Good evening, everybody. Wow, this is such a great turnout. You know, it's hard to know on a busy Saturday weekend with so many things going on, how many people we might get in a room for something like this. So thank you all for being here. I'm Christina Bruce Benyon. I'm the Executive Director of the Wassma Center for Human Rights, which is also the home of the Idaho Anne Frank Human Rights Memorial here in Boise. And just really pleased to welcome you all here tonight. This program has been a lovely collaboration. It has really been our honor at the Wassma Center to partner with Senator Melissa Wintrow, playwright Gregory Hinton, and our wonderful readers, who you'll hear more about in a moment, to bring you this powerful performance tonight. We are here, and outside there is a beautiful, bright, and colorful Pride celebration happening in our community, yet we are also in a time where there is so much anti-LGBTQIA+, sentiment, legislation, and misinformation really swirling around the country. We have seen time and time again throughout history the impact of othering a group of people and how it can be so dehumanizing, and the effect that it has in how many people it can hurt. And ultimately, if we don't do anything to stop it, it can lead to discrimination and violence. The powerful piece you are going to hear tonight actually does the opposite of that. It brings to the forefront the very personal and human impact that othering has on a person, his family, and the many lives that he touched. We invite you to listen, reflect, and carry away with you the memory of Stephen and his family, and hope that it will inspire you to remember the human impacts of inhumane acts. On your program, you will see a QR code that will allow you to donate to the Stephen Nelson Fund at Boise State, and that fund is used to support students in that community if they have issues and needs on campus. So we encourage you to think about that tonight. Now, I would like to introduce you to Gregory Hinton, our award-winning playwright this evening, for him to introduce this piece to you and tell you a little bit more about how we all got here this evening. So thank you very much and enjoy.
Thank you all for attending today. I'm kind of thrown because the suspender on my left shoulder is dropping down the side, so I don't know, whatever. Walking Stephen Home is what we call a verbatim play, and verbatim theater is theater of the imperative, and it's drawn from the real words of real people, possibly through oral histories or public testimony, impact statements, and it's curated in a direction that ideally doesn't lose the meaning of what each original speaker intended, but in a way to present the information in a bit of a theatrical way. But it's imperative. Verbatim theater is what I call the theater of the imperative, and I do believe that these are imperative times, and for Idaho to show up and just hear this true story about a loving family and their son, and I very much want to welcome you to sit back and listen. Our readers will introduce themselves at the end of the performance, and with that, thank you for attending Walking Stephen Home.
My name is Edgar Nilsson. I am the father of Stephen Nilsson. I appreciate and want to thank the court for the opportunity to.
Good morning. I am Dennis Nelson, Stephen's oldest brother. April 29th, 2016 started out as a usual started out as usual for a Friday.
I'm Donald Nelson. I'm Stephen's second oldest brother. To me, Stephen was not my gay brother.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning.
I'm Eric Nelson. I'm the fourth youngest sibling and the closest in age to Stephen.
My name is Connie Nelson Cleverly. I'm Stephen Nelson's sister. I was the first one in the family to get an inkling that something was wrong the morning that Stephen died.
Now I'm going to read a statement from his mother, Mary Nelson, if I may.
You may.
It is hard to put into words how I feel about Stephen's death. He was my youngest child.
And my best friend. I miss his phone calls. I want to pick up the phone and call him. It is so hard to think that it breaks my heart that he has gone. There is not a day that goes by that I'm not thinking of him and wishing this was a nightmare I can wake up from.
For the last 10 months, my mind has been going over the last hours of life of our youngest son, Stephen.
I got up around 5 a.m., made some coffee, opened the blinds, sat down to my laptop to look at the news. I had plans to go clay shooting later in the day. I watched the sunrise. It was a beautiful sunrise, beginning what I thought was a beautiful spring day.
I was at work, and a call came in on my cell phone. I don't usually pick up calls from numbers I don't recognize, but it was a 208 area code, so I thought it may be Steve calling to tell me that something had happened to Mom or Dad, so I answered.
I was in Iowa the day Stephen was killed. I had a mechanical failure on a trailer I was pulling. I had lost an axle and the trailer was destroyed. I had blocked the road. I had the police, the Department of Transportation, tow trucks, salvage crews all around me when the phone rang. And it was my dad. I figured he was calling to say hi and see where I was, so I cut him off short. When I finished with my situation, I called him back. And that's when I got the news. And I will never forget him saying that Stephen had been killed.
I was worried, but I really felt hopeful because Stephen was at a quality cardiac care facility. When we got there, I inquired for Stephen at the emergency room desk. After some consultation, they sent me to the trauma center desk. More consultation. They sent me up to the second floor nursing station. Again, I inquired about Stephen. They asked if I'd seen my parents. Instead of answering, they led me down the hall. So I don't recall seeing my mother there. I knew Stephen hadn't made it. She was standing there looking small, frail, and defeated. In her words, he didn't make it. Are going to be with me forever. My dad came back, and he looked as vulnerable as I've ever seen him. And they started to tell us what they knew. Until that point, I really had no idea that Stephen had been the victim of a crime.
That day is now indelibly etched into my thoughts, and I revisit what happened to my brother every day in my thoughts. I regret I was not there to help him.
We weren't there to help him when this horrific thing happened to him.
I felt so helpless.
I feel guilty that I didn't think about how hard things could be for him and do more to support him.
Stephen was an openly gay man. I accepted that. His sexual orientation was not what defined him for me. He was first and foremost my brother. Accepting Steve did not mean I portrayed him as such to my friends and acquaintances, any more than portraying my other brothers and sister as heterosexual. Because of the nature of this crime and the publicity it received, that all changed. I've been told that nobody deserves to die like that, even if he was gay. That was supposed to be comforting. It wasn't. And I've been told that my family should have disavowed him because of his homosexuality. Had nothing to do with him. And I feel both anger and pity for the narrow-minded bigotry that leads to a statement like that.
We learned that Stephen was gay when he was in high school. He came home one day with bruises. We asked him what happened. He said he fell down the stairs. The next day, the school called and said some students had hit him because he was gay. We should have pressed charges, but we did not. After that, we had gay slurs written on our car and eggs thrown at our house. I pointed out to him that he had chosen a difficult lifestyle. His response was, he said, "It wasn't chosen. It's just the way I am." Then he suggested that we seek some professional help. So we went to a psychologist, which proved to be very helpful. The subject never came up again. We as a family have stood together ever since. Excuse me.
As my brother Dennis said, and my other brothers Eric and Donald will say, Stephen wasn't our gay brother. He was just our brother. He was Stephen. So we didn't talk about his troubles as a gay man. I hope the reasons we didn't talk about what it was like to be a gay man was that he felt accepted and loved enough in our own family.
We never had lengthy discussions, nor did we have to explain or defend his life choices to me. I just accepted him as he was. Stephen was politically active and took great joy in trying to educate and inform the community about gay people. And he worked so hard to correct injustices towards the gay community. The loss of Stephen was not just a loss to our family. A voice for those who could not speak for themselves for whatever reason has been silenced.
Our immediate family has been fairly unscathed by tragedy until April 2016, when Kelly Schneider and his 3 accomplices decided to post ads to lure gay men to a remote location in order to steal their money from them and their car. As a result, our son and our brother, who in many ways was just beginning to have the fullest impact on the world at the age of 49, had his life cut short for less than $200. That day is indelibly etched in my thoughts. I regret that he decided to respond to the defendant's ad in the first place.
For the last 10 months, my mind has been going over the final hours of the life of our youngest son, Stephen, the youngest of 5 children. And my mind drifts back over the years to recall the person he was and the people he came into contact, had interactions with, mostly positive. Stephen made friends very easily. Many of them from his younger years are still his friends. Just look at his Facebook page. Stephen always had a job of some kind or another. One day he went to the flower shop in our town. He had told them he would buy some flowers if they would let him arrange them. They were for his mother. They agreed, and when he was done, they offered him a job where he worked for several years. We miss the beautiful flower arrangements he made when he was home with us. He worked in the restaurant business when he was going to college at Southern Idaho and the University of Idaho. He also delivered papers and had a number of other jobs. We think of him every time we walk out to get the paper in the morning. He took up oil painting, and he did a good job. We have a painting of a sunset on our wall. Each time I look at that painting, the image of him becomes more vivid in my mind, just knowing he will never see another sunset. He was also a fair mechanic. He had friends with cars that needed work constantly. He would call me for help to make them run. Now, each time I put a car up on the hoist in my shop, I think of Stephen. You want to talk about the impact on our lives? After 49 years, his prints are in our lives and in our hearts everywhere.
I cry a lot. Not every day anymore, and not usually for a long time, but at kind of weird times when I'm driving to work in the morning. I don't sleep very well. I worry more about my parents than I ever did when Stephen was here. It's hard living so far away. But I always knew my brothers, oldest brother Dennis and Stephen, were close by. That was comforting. Now, Dennis is the only one of us left living in Idaho. Stephen was the one who talked to Mom on a daily basis. Breaks my heart to know how much she's missing that. It breaks my heart how often we share our tears now.
The emotional impacts of the crime against my brother have been and will be devastating for me. Never again will I have the pleasure of discussing a favorite food with him. Never again will I be able to share the joys and sorrows of his life's journey with him. Never. Never again.
To this day, I remember that call. Every time I get in the truck, every time my phone rings, I hold my breath for a moment, not knowing what's going to be said. There are so many things in my life that will forever be tarnished by this act of hate.
We had to learn that Kelly Schneider repeatedly kicked Stephen in the head and in the torso with steel-toed boots, and even after Stephen pled for his life and offered to give him, Mr. Schneider, his ATM card and his PIN number. We had to learn that simply kicking Stephen was not enough. He shouted homophobic slurs at Stephen, and he stripped him of his clothes.
Now, with the court's permission, I want to go off script for a few minutes.
That's fine.
There was a time in my life when I thought I knew everything, and I was very opinionated. One time I was involved in a conversation with some guys that I worked with, and I was making judgments on some people. There was one of the guys in the group. He says, "Ed, there's a saying amongst my people." He identified himself as Native American. I said, He says, "The statement goes like this. Don't judge the old Indian until you've walked a mile in his moccasins." So I'm going to ask the court to indulge me just a few minutes and go with me out to Ghost Point in the middle of the night. The reason I want to do that, because every night for the past 11 months, I wake up in the middle of the night and I think, my mind goes over this, the trauma. I try to walk that last mile with my son. I try to understand what was going through his mind. So I want to share that with everyone who hears my voice. I don't know whether he was unconscious, but his car was taken and driven away, along with his clothes. But he woke up after they were gone and realized that he was hurt. And he put his hands up to his face to check the extent of the damage. And then he says to himself, I've got to get up. I've got to get some help. So I thought, I'll take a deep breath and go down from here. If you've ever had broken ribs, you know you cannot take a deep breath. There's no way you can expand your chest. I've had 3 broken ribs one time, and all you can do is it's like a hot cup of coffee. All you can do is just sip off the top. So he realized he could not take a deep breath. So he thought, I'll roll over here and help myself get up. And remember now, his hands are all covered with blood, and he can't get up without using his hands. So his hands are in the dirt. He finally gets up on his knees, and he's got blood all over his face and running out into his eyes. I'll wipe my eyes. And he puts his hands up to his eyes to wipe the blood out of his eyes, and it's just dirt and mud mixed with blood. And he says, I'll just wipe my hands off with my shirt. He doesn't have a shirt. I'll just wash them off on my pants. He doesn't have any pants. So he staggers to his feet and looks to see which direction he has to go for help. And he sees this. In the dim light of the early morning hours, he can see the future in the distance. So he takes a step in that direction, and his foot comes down on a puncture weed, a goat head. I don't know how many of you have ever stepped on one of those barefoot. They hurt. So he's got to reach down and pick that thing out of his foot. And he can't bend over because his ribs hurt so bad. So he drops back down to one knee to pick that sticker out of his foot. Finally gets it out. And he gets back up. And he says, well, I'll just move out to the center of this gravel road because the stickers, the puncture weeds, they just grow along the sides mostly. So he moved out to the center of the road. The road is built of crushed gravel. I don't know if people are not familiar with construction techniques. When they build a gravel road, they put crushed gravel down. Crushed gravel is fractured rock. They stay in place in the soil so your road doesn't move around when it's wet. And when you walk on that, even when you drive on that, those sharp edges tear at the tires of your automobile. And when you walk on them, they tear on your shoes. And when you're barefoot, they tear on your feet. And now he's got a mile of gravel road lined with goat heads. So desperation begins to set in on him. He says, oh, I'll just sit down here. He says, if I sit down here, I'm going to die right on the spot. So he said, desperation sets in. So he has to press on. Remember, it's the time of year, just about a year ago, and it's cold. Hypothermia is settling in. He's shaking. He's quivering. He's alone. All of his possessions have been taken from him, even his dignity. He's left stripped naked. After about halfway into this mile, your nervous system kind of gives up. That's good in some ways, but if you've ever tried to walk on your foot that's gone to sleep, can't hardly move it, you have no feeling. See, he's got 2 feet now that are numb, and he's trying to make his way to this house. As he approaches the house, he says to himself, I don't know what to do. Here I am, naked. They might shoot me. I don't know what they're going to do. He gets up on the porch, and there's a rug lying there by the door. He picks up the rug to shield his nakedness as he pushes on the doorbell or knocked on the door. He can see the people inside, and they call for help. So he's sitting on the porch waiting for the sheriff's deputy to show up. And the relief that must have given him as help showed up is almost beyond imagination. The sheriff, gave him a blanket and wrapped it around him and put him in the back seat of the car. And we've had that picture shown here in the court of him sitting in the car with blood all over his face. And he almost had a picture of relief on an expression of relief on his face.
In the days that followed, we learned more about the circumstances of Stephen's death from the Canyon County Sheriff's Office. Their professionalism and compassion, as well as that of the Canyon County prosecutors and the U.S. Attorney's Office, has meant a lot to my family during this very long ordeal. And it really, really has been a long ordeal. It's been very difficult to move through our grief when there always seems to be another conference call with prosecutors, another hearing to attend, a horrendous trial to endure. And now we have to find the words to express what we lost?
We had to learn in the early pre-dawn, frigid hours of that April morning. Stephen found it within him to get up and walk naked, about a half a mile, and you heard my dad describe what it must have been like to neighbors. You know, they wouldn't let him into their house, but they called 911. And finally, Canyon County Deputy Sheriff Christopher Odenberg arrived at the scene, and I understand that the courts reviewed the video.
That's right.
I think that it's important for you to consider, for your consideration, for two reasons. First, it shows my brother's character is in this unbelievably trying situation. Mortally wounded, naked, his first concern was to inform Deputy Odenberg that he had hepatitis C, that he had contracted a disease when he was a teenager and got in a car wreck in Alaska and had a blood transfusion that caused him to have hepatitis. And if you see in that video, he's been attacked. He needs to relay that, but his first concern is for the emergency responders and letting them know his situation. He calmly described what happened to him. And Stephen's a very straightforward person, you know, and it has to be embarrassing and humiliating. But, you know, as a result of his courageous and clear-headed account, Mr. Snyder and his 3 accomplices were all apprehended by the end of the day. And then secondly, that video to me and my family brought us comfort. Because Stephen did not survive long enough for my parents to drive from Mountain Home to see him before he passed. Our viewing of Deputy Odenberg's recorded interaction with him was incredibly important. The other thing that impacts me greatly to this day is hearing the testimony of the emergency room cardiologist. He explained that the triple stresses of the physical attack, being stripped naked, having to walk in the early morning cold, all contributed to Stephen's heart attack later that morning. He also testified that Stephen's lungs were bleeding so profusely, the cardiologist was placed in an impossible position of not being able to administer blood-thinning medication for the heart attack. His helplessness mirrored our own. I read and heard that Mr. Snyder stated that he did not intend to kill my brother. Given the horrible facts that our family has learned over the course of last year, I have a very hard time accepting that statement.
And in my brother's memory, I'd like to address those in attendance today and make a statement for the public record. As people, we must demand that our government make laws to protect those that are being mistreated by society and punish those who violate that law. But laws and punishment will not solve the problem. Only when we as a people open our minds and our hearts and accept our fellow man as they are, will real, lasting, and meaningful change ever occur. Government cannot legislate compassion, empathy, or goodwill. It must come from each and every one of us.
As painful as this tragedy has been, there are some silver linings that have helped us not give in to hate. The hate, greed, and utter callousness that befell Stephen. From the moment Deputy Odenberg opened his patrol car and offered Stephen a blanket, the local and federal law enforcement response has been a great comfort to my family. The Canyon County Sheriff's Office, the Prosecutor's Office, the FBI, the U.S. Attorney's Office, and even the Civil Rights Section of the Department of Justice have worked their tails off to apprehend Stephen's assailants and bring them to justice. And as I was preparing the eulogy, people from all over the country began sending testimonials on social media about Stephen's impact on their own lives, many stories we had never heard before. And the final silver lining that gives us a sense of impact Stephen had at Boise State during his short tenure there, the university renamed an existing scholarship fund designated to provide financial support to lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgendered students who suffered hardship as a result of openly acknowledging their sexual orientation. It's now named the Stephen Nelson Fund. It's a fitting way to turn away from hate towards love and a great tribute to our brother and son that we love so much. It also fits with the closing sentence we added to his obituary, which reads,
Throughout his life, Stephen reached out to and provided support to numerous friends and acquaintances who were down on their luck or ostracized by society, including those who were ostracized due to their sexual orientation. It's his family's sincere hope that the era of misguided bigotry against them will finally end so that all sons and daughters, brothers and sisters, can live peacefully in the full light of day.
April 29th, 2016, was suddenly covered by a violent storm cloud. And as I watched that sunrise on a beautiful spring day, my brother was fighting for his life. And that was a fight he lost.
On behalf of our entire family, we want to thank you for this opportunity to express the impact this crime had on Stephen and on us.
One more statement I want to make here is he, Stephen Eugene Nilsson, was loved. He was loved before he was born. He was loved the day he was born by his father, his mother, by his brothers, and especially his sister, all here in the courtroom today, and all who knew him. His friends and his acquaintances have expressed that they loved him. You want to talk about impact? We don't know where to start. We don't know how to express what the impact will be, what it is, when it will end. All we can say is time will heal. Thank you again, Your Honor.
Thank you, sir. This has all been very helpful, thanks to the family members. Good day.
Thank you, everyone. And from my side down, we'll introduce ourselves. But as you notice, we didn't introduce ourselves at the beginning for a good reason. But my name is Melissa. I'm the senator from District 19.
Hello, everybody. My name's Lori Watson. I am a social work professor at Boise State.
My name is Dan Prinzing. I'm a volunteer with the Wasma Center for Human Rights.
Jim Jones, formerly on a court, and now retired.
Hard act to follow. I'm Roger Sherman. Among other things, I'm the director of the Idaho Children's Trust Fund. It's a real honor to be part of this effort today, this, to voice someone else's words and be part of that. So thanks for that.
I'm Chris Mathias. I'm a member of the Idaho House of Representatives, and like Roger said, it's a privilege and an honor to be here today and voice Donald.
Hi, my name is Jimmy Halliburton. I'm the 16-year executive director of the Boise Bicycle Project and also the president of Boise City Council. It was a tremendous honor to meet the family today.
My name is Gregory Hinton, playwright. Thank you. Thank you.
And if the panel is agreeable, would each of you like to share? You can pass if you want, but I'd like to offer everyone an opportunity that actually read those words repeatedly. If you had any thoughts or hopes or things that you'd like to share based on that. You want to start, Lori?
Yeah, so it's lovely to meet you, Mary. I couldn't help but think about my own mom, who has been a fierce ally and advocate for me as a member of the LGBTQ community and my older brother. Sorry. She calls herself the fighting mother bear, and I've been incredibly fortunate to have family support and had it, growing up in a community and in a religion that where being a queer person was not okay, was not acceptable, and so my family had to push through judgment and internal pressures and challenges of their own to love and accept my brother and I fully. And I appreciate you saying, Gregory, that family is everything, because I know so many queer folks who don't have that family support. And that's when allies, advocates, others stand in, right? There, we can make our own families. We can gather each other up. My parents have been surrogate parents to literally hundreds of queer folks, especially folks who grew up in the LDS faith. And I think it's been life-saving support, and would just implore everybody who has the opportunity to support and love and accept to do it. And you might not think you're the one, right? We never know when our love, our acceptance is the love and acceptance that'll make a difference for somebody. So we all have to be part of it.
I think what becomes so poignant in this piece, and was so important in the work of the Wasmus Center, is that we cannot just talk in themes and issues. We have to give it a face and a voice. And this piece gives a face and a voice to a family. And as a father, echoing the words of another father, that's what we need to take into the legislature. That's what we need to take into the media. We are talking real lives, real people.
Justice Jones, do you want to share or do you want to pass?
Well, I'm not sure what I can share. I guess what I can tell you is that I know people in Idaho are better than you read in the newspapers. What we need to do is that people who stand up for folks who might be considered a little bit different in some respect have got to be heard. You can't keep your head down. I take some real comfort in what I see in a somewhat related situation that happened last week in Priest River. There were loud voices that were saying ugly things about transgender people, about the books in the schools, about teaching of stuff like critical race theory, and the whole 9 yards of culture war. One of the major culture warriors was hired as a superintendent, even though he was not qualified. The people in charge of the school district misbehaved to a great extent. It was probably the one most conservative school district in the entire state. Because I saw the voting track for that part of the state. But you know, decent people were talking to one another and they said, this is not right. This is not who we are. We have got to do better. And so in the recall election that occurred last week, the two biggest troublemakers on the school board were removed. And the unqualified candidate tried a couple of times to play a trick between the time that their official, between the time that the vote came in and the time that it became official, to save his job, and it didn't work. The court tossed him out. It just goes to show you that there is a deep reservoir of good-heartedness in this state that knows what we have heard here today, tonight, is absolutely wrong. those people got a good lesson. The loudmouths are not in the majority. The ones that menace us are not in the majority. I dearly like the sheriff over in Canyon County, but he's real conservative. He's a lot more conservative than I. But he treated this family very well. He treated them like they deserved to be treated. And the law enforcement system generally, the courts, were right behind them. And the people are behind them. We just have to stand up, speak out, don't let the loudmouths win. And I can guarantee you, things are going to change here. I'm an eternal optimist, but I can tell you that it's going to happen. And it's going to happen within the next year and a half.
I'm so glad that Justice Jones did not pass and that he actually shared. We'll go down the line, and then if you do want to pass, you can.
I'm not going to pass, but Chris wanted to go next.
Roger's been kind enough to let me jump the line. I want to try to catalyze Justice Jones's hope and make sure that there's a little bit more of it for people that leave today. I also want to thank the family for being here again. This has been very enlightening for me personally. There's a new book out, and I haven't read it. It's called American White Lash. And it's a book about how every time in the civil rights domain, every time there is some critical mass of progress, there's substantial pushback. And the reason I wanted to jump ahead of Roger is because he said something that when he said it an hour or two ago, it wasn't as poignant as it is now. And he said the festival that is going on right outside has been going on for 30 years. But for some reason, in just the last few, it has become the ire of, everyone who spends most of their time in their 4chan account. And for some reason, we are supposed to feel like we are bad. And I just wanted to say, my wife is here, our children are not here, but when we put our pride flag out for Pride Month, one of the things we talk about with our children is that there are Idahoans, there are thousands of Idahoans who identify in this community, and they often do not feel seen, and when they do, it is for detrimental reasons. They do not feel loved, they do not feel welcome, and that we put this flag out just so that if someone happens to be passing by our house, they feel seen, they feel heard, they feel loved, and they feel welcome. And when I hear people push back on me individually as, someone who has some sort of nefarious agenda because I want to celebrate Pride, I think we all have an obligation to just remind people until they have better ways to help our neighbors, until they have better ways to keep them from taking their own lives at shockingly high rates, until they have better ways to make these children and members of our community feel welcome, we're going to keep doing what we do. And we're going to keep getting better at it. We're going to keep loving more and including more. And so I just wanted to try to tie some of the things I heard together today. So thank you all for being here.
I think my first thought, I'm a brother. I have a brother. He's like my best buddy. And, and so the side of it that really, struck me was just that reality of, how real this would be if it were my brother. And, that's the overwhelming piece of it. So that was my impression. But I wanted to get a little political too. I was thinking about we've been, I think Justice Jones said, we're hopefully better than we are portrayed sometimes. And the way I see that, is if you remember back to the anti-gay initiative, that was run in the early 90s. And it was with the idea that at that moment we were going to, that was going to be, once they did Oregon and then they were going to get Idaho and then they were going to move across the country, and this whole thing was going to, they were going to really take it by storm. But Idahoans in eastern Idaho particularly came out against it and killed that initiative, right, from passing. And that was an amazing thing, and that fight was so impactful. And I guess, I think about this more recent initiative around Medicaid expansion, which of course has nothing per se to do with this, except that what it told me was that, a legislature that seems unable to move forward with the kinds of things that really make sense for our communities was able to do that because the people's voice was in favor of that. And I guess my hope is too that we can change things when we mobilize, when we move our, when we organize and take ourselves seriously and fight back like they did in Boundary County, which seemed unlikely, until a couple of days ago. So, all things.
Jimmy.
Yeah, I think the question was what impacted you most from reading the lines. And, I'll be honest and I'll tell you right off the bat that I didn't expect to be saying the lines in front of the person who said them today. And so I want to say thank you. I want to say sorry. I want to say I appreciate your courage and I appreciate you being here today. And so that was, I didn't know how that was going to make me feel. Second, when I read through the lines several times before coming, I at first couldn't quite figure out the reason, the focus of goat heads, which has a personal, sort of meaning to me. But until I heard the line read in the audience or read tonight, and then every single person in the audience responded to it, because I think it's a pain that you can imagine, and it hurts really bad. And so it's something that everyone in here, and if you've lived in this area, that you've probably felt, and you know how terrible that is, and you know that was the smallest amount of pain that Stephen was probably experiencing at the time. So I think that's the second thing, and so I get it now. And then I think the third thing is one of my lines, and it's the line about the neighbors who did call for help, but didn't let them in. And I don't know the whole story there, but in my head, I ask myself, would I have let that person in? And would we as a community have let that person in? And I hope that the answer is yes. And I thought about this a lot earlier today about the city of Boise. I got to go on stage and help kick off the festival this morning at 11. The mayor had some really beautiful words. And thinking about what the city of Boise's responsibility is when we don't always feel like we have a lot of control. And I think that the city of Boise is responsible, you all being part of this community, our responsibility is letting that person in the door when they don't feel like there's another door for them to go through in our state. I know the last several years especially have been hard for a lot of folks. I've felt it. I know folks here have felt it more personally than I have. And you've probably asked yourself, is this a place for me? Is this the community that I want to live in? Should I go somewhere else? Do I belong? And am I accepted here? Am I safe here? And I hope that you know that the answer is yes. And I hope that we deliver that message to you in Boise when you may not feel safe in other areas, that we want you here, we love you here, we value you here, and we don't want you to go anywhere, and you can't. You got to stay here, and we got to keep working to do the stuff that we're doing. And I know that that's hard. And then I guess the very last thing I would say is I did walk through the festival earlier today, and this is probably, I don't know, the 7th, maybe 10th time, that I've been coming down for a long time. And I noticed something that was different. Maybe I didn't notice it before, but it was like along the 6th Street, the whole back edge, the whole east side of the park, church after church after church after church after church. And I didn't expect that to be sort of a powerful moment. One of the churches was the Unitarian Church. I think they actually helped organize some of them, and we've got some of the folks here tonight. But you don't always think of our churches as the ones that are standing up for our LGBTQ plus community. And when I hear what the justice said, when I hear what my fellow colleagues up here said, I think one of the things I think about a lot is that there's a group of folks out there who are really, really good at pretending that they're bigger than that they are. And they do that with their trucks, they do that with their armored jackets, they do that with their guns. They look really big, they sound really big. They're not that big. And there's a far bigger community that's out there that loves and supports their neighbors, that would let that person in the door when they needed to. I'm proud to live in a community that does that. I'm proud of the folks up here that I know that would do that. I'm proud of all of you as well. And certainly proud to have been part of reading my lines tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Jimmy. I think, unless Gregory, you have something else you want to share, I think that's what Jimmy and everybody has said. Really, the thing that probably resonates for everybody is love and compassion. And even today, I get asked, I think every day, how do you do it? Right? And most times I say, well, I don't know. But I think the way we all do it, the way you do it, is that we know with shoulders back, with love in our hearts, even facing hate, when we are grounded with each other and that support, we can do anything. Now, it may not be easy, but the most important thing that I share with you tonight and I share with my students is I teach a gender studies course, and we talk about when you start to learn about certain systems, you can't go back not knowing. You can't say, I don't know anymore. And I tell them, you have to find your disbelievers, and you have to surround yourself with folks who will support you as you go into war, and you have to come back, and you go, right? So our families, I go home, I have my family, I have my friends, I have my constituents, I have my neighbors. I walk down the north end. You cannot walk one block without seeing a rainbow flag or everyone is welcome. It makes me smile. I feel safe. I feel happy. And so as we leave today, let's take the compassion and love of this family who didn't press charges initially, but shared their words, and through Gregory, hopefully ignites our own compassion to keep leading in strength and company, right? We can do it. We can do it, especially with folks like Justice Jones. So as we leave tonight, share with each other, hug each other, support each other, and let's go back into battle with love and compassion in our hearts. Doesn't mean you can't fight hard, but we fight better when we have peace, right? When we are grounded. Go forward, be with each other, and support each other. Thanks so much for coming, and donate to the Stephen Nelson Fund.